Hey, everybody. One more time. Welcome back to Lead Culture with the one and the only Jenni Catron. My name is Trey McKnight, and I am excited and thrilled that I get to host you yet again as we dive into such a critical time. We say this all the time, but it's such a critical time for leadership, Jenni. And here we are just having these conversations and these discussions in ways that we hope that those of you who are listening can take away even just a little piece of something that might be helpful in your leadership. So Jenni, first off, we always got to know how you doing.
Awesome. Trey, I'm doing well. I always love when we get to do the episodes together because it's like
Yeah,
I'm instead of me being a talking head, I get to have a conversation, and
absolutely.
this is lots of fun. Yeah, I'm doing well. The fall is so busy.
Yeah,
Lots of time on the ground, on site with some of our clients.
yeah,
Working on everything from culture to strategic planning to leadership development, and there's just a lot of energy I get from that, of just being able to be with
yeah.
the leaders that we serve and talking all of the good things and the challenging things that come with leadership. So that's what
Yep.
the fall is full of right now, and it's a lot of fun, and it's also, the pace is pretty full.
The pace is moving. I always call the fall like conference season. I just feel
Yes.
like everybody, obviously like the spring, there's a lot of conferences. I feel like the fall is just when they're slammed. And
Yes.
so I'm enjoying a little bit of downtime before here at the beginning of October, things are going to start picking up. So
Yeah.
I'm with you on that. It's just that time of year, but it is energizing and it's really cool to see and have conversations with people who are facing some of the challenges, one of which we want to talk about today.
That's right.
It is a help, but also I think a huge challenge in leadership because we all come from different backgrounds and we have different ways of communicating. And
Yes.
when we think about communication, obviously it's I would say it's probably one of the pillars of leadership. As a matter of fact, you actually I quoted you on something. You wrote a blog not too long
Mm-hmm.
ago, and you say if everything rises and falls on leadership, leadership rises and falls on communication,
Mm-hmm.
which I think speaks directly to the heart of the how critical it is to practice. And I say practice because it's not something that I don't think any of us are really good at naturally.
That's right.
but
Yes.
but for us to practice great communication in our leadership within our organizations and our teams and to build great cultures, it really is critical to do this well. So when you think about communication, when you think about things that you've seen, experiences you've had, even personally, on maybe ways that communication has been really great, but then also ways that communication has caused, or the lack of communication, or the lack of
Mm-hmm.
good communication has caused issues. I mean, just what are some of the things that come to mind for you?
Yeah, Trey, it's funny because it feels like such a simple topic, right? Because it's like, duh, of course, communication is critical for every leader. But every time that we, are digging deep with a leader or their team, we just quickly find kind of communication at the core. And some of the most successful teams, it's like good communication is what's fueling good culture. And
Mm-hmm.
some of the teams that are really struggling, it's like there's a lack of communication. Something's getting stuck somewhere. Information isn't cascading. The leader maybe isn't being as clear as they think they are. And I think it's such an important reminder. And gosh, Trey, I mean, you experienced this with me on the Foresight team, that there are occasions where I feel like I've communicated something to the whole team and I haven't, or maybe I said it once in one way through one channel and I think it's done. And everybody's busy with myriad of things going on. And, I mean, oh, I kind of vaguely remember that, but what is that about? Like, what's happening?
Right.
Um, so I think we underestimate how critical communication is to leading well. And again, we find it kind of at the heart of many of the conversations that we have with leaders. And rarely is it that a leader is intentionally communicating poorly, right? Like,
Right.
rarely is a leader. And I think there are occasions where maybe because of power, you want to hold on to information and you're not
Right.
communicating. But I think that's really the exception rather than the norm. I
Mm-hmm.
think typically just busyness is, you're just caught up in the whirlwind of all the activities and you're just not recognizing or taking the time to really think about what needs to be communicated and when. Or it feels clear to you, so you think it's clear to everybody else.
Yeah.
And so we see those things time and time again. And so I think, again, when you and I were talking about this week's episode, I think this is like, especially this busy fall where everybody's going to be going a million directions. Hey, what are some of those fundamentals? What are those things I need to be reminded of to help me lead well right now? And communication just tops the list for me.
Yeah, I think communication is, I dare say, more critical now than it's ever been. I don't know if it could be more critical than it's ever been. It always has been.
Right,
But
right.
I think
But
that
yeah,
even as we face just the changing landscape across the board of remote work now, and
yes,
obviously there are lots of different channels, as you mentioned, that we can communicate through. And I don't know that it matters necessarily which channels you use, as long as you are focusing on making sure that everyone has access to those channels and it is widely adopted, or forced, or however you want to lead,
right, right.
um, but yeah, making sure that everybody has access to the communication that needs to go out and is communicating through the proper channels, whether it's person to person or through tools such as Slack or whatever else, text messaging, whatever people use. So I
Yeah,
think it's more critical now than it ever has been, because the landscape is changing in work and people are changing how they work, they're changing
that's
how they
right.
view work, and so it's really important. You mentioned we always talk about being intentional here, and you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned you said a word that, or a phrase, taking the time to communicate
Mm,
appropriately. Maybe
yeah.
unpack that a little bit more. And I don't want to get into the 6 points yet. We're going to get into the 6 points of of things that you should be when creating great communication. But what does it mean to take the time to communicate appropriately?
Yeah, I think when I think about that is, again, oftentimes for me as a leader, I am just moving so quickly that I'm not I'm not pausing to reflect on what needs to be
Mm-hmm.
communicated to whom. I said this yesterday. I was on site with the team doing a workshop, and we weren't even doing a workshop on communication, but communication showed up in the workshop we were doing.
Yeah.
And I said, even three simple things, three simple questions can improve communication in your organization. Who needs to know?
Mm-hmm.
What do they need to know?
Mm-hmm.
And when do they need to know it?
It's good.
And if I just slow down, so take the time to pause, like if I'm about to make a move, a decision, something, first of all, there has to be an acknowledgement that as somebody that's part of a team, there is not anything that you do that isn't going to impact somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
There's just not. We're just interconnected and we're interdependent, and we have to recognize that. And I'm hyper independent in most things. And so like this has been a learning curve for me, is to recognize I have to be more interdependent to be a successful leader and to be a successful team contributor.
Yeah.
And so, first of all, I have to have the recognition that if I'm going to make a move, if I'm going to make a decision, take action, somebody else is going to be impacted. So, before I start just doing the things, which I'm inclined to do as a leader, I have to pause and say, wait, who needs to know this?
Mm-hmm.
Because somebody's going to be impacted by it. Who
Yep.
needs to know this? Exactly what do they need to know? Because there's probably a few different who's who need to know this, and then those few different who's probably might need to know different components of it. So
Yep.
who needs to know? What do they need to know? And when? Right?
Yeah.
Because the when is probably now, and I'm about to go like make decisions and pull levers and like
Right.
create chaos. And if I haven't communicated to the other people that are going to be impacted by this, I start to really erode trust
Mm-hmm.
with my teammates. I can create some chaos organizationally. And ultimately, that starts impacting culture. That starts really
Yeah.
impacting the team dynamic. And so, the taking the time is just slowing down enough to be conscientious of when I'm making a move as a team member or a leader, somebody's being impacted, and I need to think about what I need to communicate to make sure, because ultimately whatever I'm doing, I'm wanting to help the organization succeed.
Right.
Let's assume best intent, right? Like
Yep.
I'm trying to do something that's going to help move the organization forward. But if I'm not communicating that well, I'm it's possible that I'm going to take the organization backwards rather than
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah.
And so that to me is like the taking the time is just pausing to go, wait a minute, who needs to know? What do they need to know? And when do
Mm-hmm.
they need to know it?
Yeah. Is there an element here that would lend toward the tension between over communicating and under communicating with intentionality? And what I mean
Yeah.
by that is, I think that where I struggle sometimes in leadership is not only who needs to know and what do they need to know and when do they need to know it, but how much of what do
That's
they need to
good.
know, you know?
Yeah.
And because if you're depending on the seat that you sit in from a leadership standpoint, you have to protect the interest of the organization
That's
with
right.
how much information is released when. You
Yes.
also have to protect the interest of culture, which is, and we've heard people say very abundantly, over communicate everything,
Right.
right?
Right.
Which sometimes means you're going to say it and then say it again and then say it again and then say it again, and you're saying the same thing,
Yeah.
but you're just saying it over and over again. But I
Right.
think also sometimes that means we're going to share with a select group of people maybe a little bit more than what we feel completely comfortable sharing, so that we have buy-in from that group of people. But that's a really, really fine line to walk. So maybe unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a big one, Trey. And it's a really good question because I think because of the complexity of that, I think we do either over communicate or under communicate, right? I think because it feels a little bit complex. And there's some wisdom in that, and there's some important discernment in that. And I think one of the filters for me about, okay, who needs to know and what do they need to know, and then when, is, we used to have an axiom in one of the organizations that I was a part of, is that everybody can know everything, just not always all at the same time. Because there is an importance to the cascading of information, especially if it's decision making that impacts different people in different ways. So if you're doing like an org structure change, or if there's a key leadership change that's going to impact a lot of people, but the appropriate cascading of that information is really, like, there's a respectfulness to the process.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I would say about communication, is that depending on the information and what's being communicated, we always want to think about, how do I respectfully make sure the right people get the right information at the right time?
Yeah.
And that, because sometimes you'll have people that are like, I didn't know that, and I should have known that 2 weeks ago. Well, actually, you got the information at the time you needed to get it, because out of respect to other people who needed to know that information first, because of what it was and how it impacted them. Like, some people just want to know everything right away, and that's not always realistic or reasonable. So there is I think the word respect just comes back. Like, what's the most respectful way to communicate this to the right people at the right time? Yeah. And I think if you use that filter, that's going to help you discern, okay, what do I need to share when? I like that you pointed out sometimes you have to share a little bit more with a key group to help with buy-in, and sometimes even processing of like, hey, here's what's going on.
Right.
We had a conversation as a team a few weeks ago of, I just kind of let the team into some strategic planning for, the next 6 months, and said, hey, here's a couple of key decisions we have to make. Well, it was a little vulnerable for me to kind of share that with the team, to say, hey, here's what we've got kind of coming, and I'd love your input, because, if we make this decision, it could mean this. If we make this decision, it could mean this. And, it was nothing like catastrophic, but it's definitely like directionary vision for our team. And bringing them into it was a little bit of vulnerability, because here's the other piece. I put a little burden on them by sharing that information. By communicating some of the big picture strategy that I'm navigating as a leader, I'm putting a little pressure on some of our core team to have to wrestle that decision with me. And so this is another really big piece of communication, and that discernment and respectfulness in communication, is I had to count the cost of, okay, so if I invite my team into this decision and problem that we're trying to solve, I have to recognize that by communicating that problem without a solution, I was putting a little bit of burden on them to help them, for them to solve it with me.
Yeah.
But was doing that, like, putting a little bit of that burden on them, worth it for the bringing them into it, so they felt ownership with me. Right now, there's a couple of key team members where that was appropriate, because they're in the thick of it with me. But if I had pulled in like all of our coaches into that discussion, it would just put a burden on the rest of the team that wasn't really a burden for them to carry. And so that's another thing in the right information to the right people at the right time is, yes, I think most of us could err more on the over communicating rather than the under communicating, but that that understanding of what's the right information for the right people. Because when you communicate something, especially if it's information that needs to be held for a time, so let's say there's a key decision coming, but it's not public. And so as soon as you communicate that to some people, you put the burden on them of holding information that, doesn't need to go anywhere else. And, or you might communicate something that, might be challenging or burdensome in some way that they don't have agency to help solve. And so you've got to be mindful of, if I'm just communicating it to get it off my back and feel like I'm sharing the load, but I'm sharing the load with people who don't have any influence in helping solve it, I could just create stress and anxiety. So there's a ton of things. I don't know if that's where you're going with that question, but there's a ton of that going on that I think as leaders, there's just some real wisdom and discernment in the right information to the right people at the right time. And so that's a big piece of just the communication conundrum, as we might say, right?
That's exactly true. And again, I think that goes back to the idea that this is a practice. This is there's a reason that doctors practice. There's a reason that lawyers practice. There's a reason that leaders practice communication, because we've never arrived. We have to keep working through it, keep trying. A lot of it is trial and error. You try to be as wisdom as you can, You try to be as wise as you can as you think through things and make decisions. But then continue to move forward and learn from it and do it better the next time. I want to shift a little bit, but this is still informative to the conversation we're having. But you have these 6 B's of communication, essentially 6 things that you can be in the pursuit and the practice of becoming a great communicator in leadership and to create great culture. So maybe I don't know if we have time to touch all 6, or if we want to just kind of run through them, or I'll let you kind of guide that. But the first one, be a good listener.
Yeah. And really, these were written out of just a heart to say, okay, how do we think about communication? And these were written with the idea of anybody at any level. I think these 6 B's can be really practical. So be a good listener. Our temptation is to hurry through conversations, make the quick decision, et cetera. And I think I noticed this about myself. And again, this probably has a bit to do with that. Like I have that just nature to move things forward quickly. Like, I don't know if I've told you this before, Trey, because I tell this story occasionally, but I have this vivid memory of when I was like 8 years old, of my dad giving me a really gracious but kind lecture about being patient. And we were in his truck driving somewhere. Dad, if you're listening, you might remember this. I don't know, but like it stuck out with me because he was like, Jennifer, you need to be more patient. And I was like 8, right? Like, I'm like, this is crazy. Like he's telling me as an 8-year-old.
How do you tell an 8-year-old to be more patient? Right.
And I'm sure it was something about my siblings. There's probably something I was being impatient about with my siblings.
Right.
But so, I mean, I just by nature am not a very patient person. I want to keep moving things forward. But the danger in that, because sometimes that can be a helpful leadership quality, that drivenness has its other issues as well. But being a good listener, of really like being intentional with listening. And I think that I what I notice about myself is that I will listen for the purpose of taking action. I will listen for the purpose of solving the problem, right? And so when I say be a good listener, I'm not saying just kind of listen to get to the end result. I'm saying, wait, hey, really like slow down. I'll say often, put your curiosity hat on, and that's like just a physical or visual that I can make of like, hey, put my curiosity hat on. Okay, what are they really saying? Ask a few intentional questions and really try to make sure that you're really listening for the context, the heart, the spirit of whatever is being communicated to you. Because there's typically more behind it, especially if you're in a leadership seat. When your team members are sharing something with you, whatever they're saying, there's probably like, a million more things behind that they've tried to say succinctly, probably because they know you're typically in a hurry. So they're thinking, how can I communicate this to her in the fastest way possible to get her attention and to keep moving forward? But there's probably a lot more depth behind what they're perceiving or they're sensing. And so just making sure that you are being an intentional listener. I said be a good listener, but maybe it's more of like be an intentional listener. Put the curiosity hat on, ask some good questions. because that's going to help you have better understanding that, listening is a component of communication, right? Like we think communication is just talking. No,
Right.
good communication is also good listening. And I think
Absolutely.
there's a what do I want to say, servant attitude in being a good listener. And we all know that, servant leadership is a really important part of leadership. And so that's where I would say I would start, is be a good listener.
Yeah. You mentioned that it's necessary, or I'm sorry, you mentioned that sometimes when people are trying to speak something succinctly to you, that it's probably because in their mind, they know, oh, they're really busy or they're in a hurry, which I think is a really good way to listen with things that are not spoken. I think that
Yes.
one of the things when it comes to communication is also, and it's kind of gets us to our second point of be self-aware.
Yes.
But I think that there's an element of listening that we can do by also watching and seeing. For instance, an organization that I work with, when we look at our staff meetings, when we look at any meetings, when you have people who are attending, you have high attendance at your staff meetings, that to me, or you have growth, a steady growth in your staff meetings, that tells me, okay, the time that we're putting into this is valuable to these people. And so they're going to show up for it.
That's
right?
really good. Yes.
Versus the flip of that, which is if what we're doing is not valuable to the people who we're asking to show up, they're going to start to decline. They're going to not show up. They're going to find excuses not to be in the room. And therefore, if your attendance at your staff meetings with whatever frequency they are is declining, that should be something you should be listening, quote unquote, to.
That's really good. Yes.
But maybe it is a self-aware piece. It's recognizing, am I too busy? Do the people that work with me have the sense that I'm always too busy for them? Maybe I need to be aware. So maybe unpack some of the be self-aware, number 2 on that.
Yeah. I love what you identified there, because part of listening is like understanding what's even not being said. And that does go hand in hand with the being self-aware. I like that you said, I will notice that when somebody says, I know you're busy, but.
Yes. That's
so
hard to hear.
Oh, it's terrible to hear. But it's really telling, isn't it? Like, so, okay, ding, 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 self-awareness clue. What am I projecting that is creating the perception that I'm too busy for my team?
Yes.
Ouch, ouch, ouch. Now there's, I can probably give you a zillion reasons why that's the case, but it still is like really important to understand, and like, again, some of those little things can just be good little like caution flags to say, oh, hey, here's something for you to be aware of. There's something that you're communicating that people are perceiving and that you don't have time for them. And so, so much of this is about, how people experience us. Like, what's the environment I create? A good friend of mine says, self-awareness really is how I understand myself, how I understand others, and how I understand how people experience themselves around me. And I love this third one, because it's like, okay, do I have good awareness of how you feel when you interact with me? Like, do I make you anxious? Do I make you energized? Do I stress you out? Do I overwhelm you? Like, what in how I interact and how I communicate, how does that make you feel? How does that make the other people in the room feel, the people that I lead feel? And growing in that self-awareness of just what's the that adage that, we need to be the thermostat, not the thermometer. Am I saying that right? Right? Like, it's like, we need to be aware of the tone we're creating, the temperature we're setting.
The thermometer, not the thermostat, right? Maybe I'm getting it wrong. I don't know.
I was gonna say, everybody
it's
else.
One of those.
It's one of those. But the point being, am I being intentional? Am I aware of how I'm setting the tone? Right? Am I aware of the tone that I'm setting when I walk into the room? And that's the self-awareness piece. And first of all, we have to be good listeners to have some self-awareness. There are some really good tools that help us kind of unpack that. Emotional health, or emotional intelligence 2.0 is one of my favorite books on EQ and self-awareness. But I think just recognizing, hey, how I perceive myself might not exactly be how others perceive me. And I need to grow in my self-awareness of how do others experience me, and where might that be inhibiting how I'm communicating? Like, if I'm showing up a ball of stress and hurriedness,
That's another good one.
right? Then probably the people around me, I'm not getting their best feedback because I'm probably creating that tone in the room, right?
Yep.
Like for some people that'll shut them down, for some people
Mhm.
it'll make them anxious or nervous. And so however I'm showing up is setting the tone for whether people are even hearing what I'm communicating or saying, and
Yep.
or how they're hearing or hearing what I'm communicating. And so that's a big one.
Yep. We've all been in the room with those people who, when they walk into a room, they either lift it
That's
or
right.
they can crush the mood and crush the vibe really quickly. And it's
Yeah.
all in how you carry yourself and how self-aware you are of again, the temperature that you're setting. And one of the great ways to discover this is to have one of the best ways that I've discovered certain things that I'm still working through myself,
Mm-hmm.
is to have someone, a trusted individual, a coach, who can
Yes.
help you understand that, who can help unpack that for you, who can help walk through, who can help observe what you're doing, either through stories that you tell or actually being in the room with you, to help you understand, hey, this is what it's like to be on the other side of you. Our friend Jeff Henderson says that all the time. What's it
Yes.
like to be on the other side of me? We have to constantly lean into that and be sensitive, which is our third point,
Mm-hmm.
of what we should be in communication. So maybe go with number 3 on be sensitive.
Yeah. When, this is that whole one of like, communication isn't simply just saying what you mean, it's how you say what you
Mhm.
mean. And we've all had that conversation, right? If you're married, you've had this conversation. It's not what you
Yes,
said, it's how you
how
said
you
it,
said it.
right? And the same is true in the workplace. The same is true in most of our conversations. It goes hand in hand with the self-awareness piece that we've got to be sensitive to how we say things.
Yeah.
Um, I kind of have a running joke often with the team is that, I will launch into a text message or a Slack message, or we'll be on a Zoom call together, and I'll just, get straight down to business, and I'll kind of like focused Jenni shows up because I'm in the zone. And then I will catch it. I'll be like, wait a minute, sorry guys, hey, how's everybody doing?
Right.
Because my self-awareness takes a minute to catch up for me, and then my sensitivity kicks
Well, it's
in.
because you're running so fast that it's behind you, right? It's
That's
like you're just okay, get on to the next thing. By the time you get in the room, your self-awareness is coming in out of breath.
That's
I'm here.
exactly right. Yes, that's exactly right. So I get this wrong all the time. And fortunately, I think, having good team members who will also like in creating a culture where, people feel comfortable of kind of like,
Mhm.
you know, recognizing that, or sometimes giving you a little grace with it, but also helping you notice and observe it. But it's just the how we say things matters.
Yeah.
And the timing kind of goes hand in hand with that, which is one of the other ones. But just being sensitive to how we say things. I think sometimes when we have to say something that's challenging, we because we're nervous, we might communicate it in a way that also lacks like sensitivity or heart, because we're just trying to get through the hard thing we have to communicate,
Right. Yep.
and we actually exasperate the issue. So let's say we have to have a hard conversation with a team member, giving them some feedback on an issue. Sometimes you can go into like stoic mode of like, well, here's what happened, and here's how I wish you had done that differently, or here's some coaching
Mhm.
for and we remove some of our humanness in that, because we're trying to, because it's hard for us. It's hard for us to like say the hard thing, and so then it loses a little heart, and then it actually kind of exasperates a hard conversation rather than
Right.
helping it. So, just being sensitive to how you say things also is communicating,
Yep.
and be conscientious of that.
I'm currently going through, a lot of you are familiar with Masterclass, currently going through Masterclass. I believe his name is Chris Voss, who teaches a class on negotiation. He's this
Oh,
famed, one of the best negotiators, like hostage negotiators from the FBI in the world. And literally was just watching it this morning. He was talking about one of the most critical pieces of negotiation, which is essentially he describes as getting more of what you want by it's communication, it's inviting people in, it's all that. But
interesting.
he says one of the most critical pieces of that is your tone. It's how you
Oh,
say what it is that you're trying to say, because that can either help or it can hurt what you're trying to accomplish together in the collaboration. He says negotiation is a collaboration. It's not just me telling you what I want. It's we're going
yes,
to find a way to get there, because you have the ability to step into someone else's shoes, to be sensitive to both how you're
brilliant.
saying and what you're saying, and then also what it is that they see on their side. which helps everybody get to a win for both sides. So
Yeah.
That's
really good.
I love that you speak into that, because I think that it really is a critical piece. Tone makes all the difference in the world. One of my favorite ways to, you mentioned as you come running into a room and you're ready to jump right into the agenda. One of my favorite ways to kind of level set at the beginning of my meetings is we'll do what's called a temp check. And we'll essentially go around the room really quickly with everybody in the room. And I would say to you, Jenni, what's your temp check for you? So 1 being, it's the worst day that I could be possibly having. 10 being, I'm sunning on a beach, or I'm sitting at the lake, or whatever is your happy place. You find where it is. You can give data, or you don't have to give data. And so I would say, Jenni, what's your temp? And then you would give it to me. And then I would say, I'm an 8 today because I'm going on vacation in a couple of days, or whatever it is. But what that does is kind of gets everybody, no matter where we've come from,
that's good,
on a level playing field. And now everybody in the room also, if Jenni, you were to say, I'm a 4 today, I'm hopefully going to be a little more sensitive to the fact that whatever's going on in your life today,
that's right,
is going to affect how you see everything else and everything that's being communicated for the next 15, 20, 30, 45 minutes in this meeting.
That's so good.
I think that opens the door to allow us to be more sensitive to the people that are in the room, so that we can approach each person and meet them where they are, rather than just blurting out what it is that we need to get off so that we can check a box and then run out of there and go on to the next thing. So
Trey, I love that. I love that. That's such a good, like, practical way to, again, just to create a moment of connection that settles everybody down to engage where you are. So good. So good.
Yeah. So we're going to run through these last 3 really quickly.
Say, we'll hit the last 3.
We can keep talking about these so much. It's just, we get so fired up about them. All right. So number 4, be direct and confident.
I mean, it's kind of good we said we had to do these last 3 quickly, right? Because the next one, this one is be direct and confident, right? Yeah. So, whether we need to deliver feedback, constructive criticism, sometimes we can be guilty of trying to convolute it or say too much. I can use too many words all the time. And so, saying what you need to say kindly, succinctly, and honestly can be so powerful, right? Again, doesn't have to lack heart. Kindly, succinctly, and honestly. And I think if you thought about those 3 words going into especially hard conversations, that can be really, really helpful. Yeah. The next one is being well-timed, just again, this is a discernment piece of knowing when to give that word of encouragement, knowing when is the right time for some criticism or constructive feedback. And, because you want to be sensitive to when can that motivate or when can that derail? It's like when you were talking about the temp check with your team. Well, if I'm a 4 and it's, having a rougher day, well, then it might not be the best time to give me that, constructive feedback that you needed to give me. It's not that you don't need to give it, you do, so it's not like we put that off for forever, but just kind of being conscientious of, is this timing right? If somebody's right in the middle of a project and you need to give some feedback, but it's not going to be consequential to what they're immediately doing, wait and let them finish it. When I was on church staff, the worst thing I could do is on Sunday morning, give a team member feedback in the moment on something that wasn't going well. They knew, and they're having to troubleshoot in the moment, and they really don't need me adding to their stress, right? Yep. And so, apply that in any context and just go, hey, just be conscientious of the timing. Sometimes I want to, here's the kicker. I want to get it off of my chest. Yeah. And I'm fired up and frustrated. And so that's motivating me to have the hard conversation with you, but it's probably not the right timing, both because I need to be a little more level-headed about it. Yep. And because, the heat of the moment is rarely the best time to actually engage it. And so that being well-timed, again, is a big point of discernment. That's part of that. That's really critical.
Can I give you a great visual on that just came to my mind?
Please.
Because you're using words like heat of the moment. And I don't know if you use this, but I thought this when in the middle of the fire burning. So I used to be a firefighter.
Oh, this is right.
Literally have been in burning buildings fighting a fire. Yeah. I can tell you this, we have a very military type structure when it comes to firefighting, that you have chiefs, you have captains, you have lieutenants, you have firefighters, and on down from there, right? When we're in the middle of a fire, is not the time for my lieutenant or my captain or anybody above me to come and try to have a conversation with me about how I can do something better the next time. We still have a task at hand, which is to put out the fire. Right.
Yes. Yes. Yep.
So I think about that visual and everything that you're talking about, is to have this idea of be well timed. It's like, we're fighting a fire together. My lieutenant is no longer lieutenant. It's Mike. Mike, I
Right.
need your help on this. We're all in
That's
this
good.
together. We're going to put this fire out. We're going to make sure that everybody stays safe. Then when we get out and things chill out a little bit, literally in that situation,
Yeah. Right. Yes, exactly.
then we can have a conversation about how we can do it better the next time. And we continue to build on each other. Anyway, just
That's
thought that
really
might be
good.
a great visual there.
I love that. So
So,
good. So good.
number 6, be you.
Yeah. At the end of the day, really understanding your wiring, your giftedness, how your personality, having the self-awareness, right? Of like, okay, what do I know about myself and how I naturally engage? And then kind of finding my voice, trusting my instincts, and communicating in a way that's authentic to me. I think the
Mhm.
danger for many leaders is there's probably been a leader or a mentor or a coach somewhere that really inspired us. And so we have a tendency to want to mimic their style.
Mhm.
And there's some wonderful things to learn from our leaders and mentors. And I'm the first to say, yes, absolutely. We want to like learn and glean. But then we want to figure out, okay, how does that fit me? I
Right.
always think of that story of David and when he was about to take on Goliath and Saul tried to put all the armor on
Yep.
him. And
Yes.
David was like, I can't go in these.
Yeah.
He's like, here's what I know. I mean, David, what I envision in that moment is David saying to Saul, because David put everything on. Like he took
Yep.
Saul's advice to say, hey, here's the gear, kid.
Yeah.
Let's
Right.
do our best to equip you to succeed.
Yeah.
And so David heeded that coaching, but then he said, no, this doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
Thank you,
That's
Saul.
so good. Yeah.
Here's what works for you. What I know is my stones and my slingshot.
Yep.
Like that's the tool I know. This is how I'm used to communicating, so to
Yeah.
speak. And so I think there's just wisdom in, the coaching of mentors and like learning and gleaning from them, but then also really understanding your voice as a leader and how you communicate and what's your style and doing some good work around that to be clear about what does it look like to be you, for your heart, your instincts, your personality to come through and how you communicate.
Which also speaks to when you are leading and developing someone else who you would be the mentor to. It's good for us to give them room
That's
to
good.
take coaching that we give them, to take the leadership style that we give them. Just because it works well for me does not mean that it's going to be the best thing for you. So I need to give you room to grow in that in the way that you can be you when you're communicating and when you're leading as well. So I think that's also something really important to remember there. Jenni, that's a whole other conversation. We could go there, but maybe we'll do that sometime. Maybe we'll do that the next time that we have a podcast. But for today, that is plenty of things I think that I walk away with, and hopefully that those of you listening can walk away with, and that we can just continue to grow together in our leadership. These are 6 B's of communication. Maybe you have some other B's of communication, but hopefully that gives you a starting place to just enhance what we're doing every day, as it is true. I'm going to read this one more time. It says that everything rises and falls on leadership. Leadership rises and falls on communication. The one and only Jenni Catron quoted that one. You can find those resources on the blog. There's books that she's written that you can go and check out. And of course, you can come to our website at getforesight.com, where there's tons of resources there for you to just continue in your leadership journey, as well as we've got something really exciting coming up. Now, you probably heard about it if you've been listening to the podcast, but the 6 traits of an extraordinary leader is coming up very soon. This is actually the last week that you can register for that. It's going to be really great. Myself, all of our coaches, Jenni, of course, are going to be speaking into that over the next few weeks. So we'd love to have you join us in that cohort. And you can go to getforesight.com/extraordinary leader. We would love to see you there. But until then, Jenni, I think that's it. You got any parting words?
I think that's it. Thanks everybody for joining us. We would love it if you would rate, review, subscribe, give us some feedback. Let us know how we can serve you well. And Trey, thank you for leading the conversation today. Always grateful to join you on the podcast. So thanks everybody.
Bye, everybody.